Quite a busy news day. We were supposed to talk about Hong Kong, but I need to start by asking you your thoughts on what happened in Washington, D.C. Your first reaction.
Well, I think that today was a big day for both Hong Kong and the United States in the sense that in both places, the central importance of rule of law and respect for law and constitutional prerogatives was clear. And in the Hong Kong context, of course, this was a unmitigatedly distressing day. In the United States, frankly, as a citizen, just as a private citizen, I'm quite encouraged that Congress went back into session this evening and is going to conclude the certification of the election according to the Constitution as the American people want them to do, and that they're not being deterred by the kind of thuggery that we saw today. So I emerge personally hopeful, but similarly at the same time worried about the fact that this kind of thing could happen in the United States.
Kurt, from one attack on democracy in the US to another attack on democracy in Hong Kong, the rounding up of more than 50 pro-democracy lawmakers, activists, journalists, a lawyer as well, a US lawyer. Is this the final nail in the coffin for the democracy movement in Hong Kong?
Well, I'm concerned that it's not the final nail. I think it's a major setback to the idea that one can use, again, according to rule of law, according to the provisions, in this case of the basic law, one can try to exert influence over power and over policy using democratic mechanisms, in this case through the Legislative Council, and that it's okay for an opposition to organize and organize with the intent to win greater power over government affairs, which is essentially the nature of competitive elections. What the message today was that I took away was that competitive elections are no longer welcome in Hong Kong. I hope that the Legislative Council can be brought back to life and made into an institution that continues to reinforce good governance in Hong Kong and make it a great place to do business. But I'm concerned. I'm not ready to say that it's the final nail. However, we got to hope and hope that the importance of rule of law, the importance of democratic processes in support of good governance somehow gets recognized once again in Hong Kong.
Kurt, just to pick up on what you mentioned, the notion that it's business as usual here, the messaging to the international business community, the financial community, for conversation's sake, a Hong Kong political spectrum effectively without a functioning counterbalance of an opposition, how much damage do you think that potentially then does to the city as a financial center, if any?
We're going to have to see how this evolves over time. Certainly it's a setback. And there has been some negative reaction from the international business community today in Hong Kong, because having a viable legislature and the whole concept of checks and balances and governance reinforces confidence in the judiciary and in fair processes for budget, for court decisions, and all these pieces fit together. So it's definitely a negative trend, but I wouldn't write the city off. Now, from my perspective, what Beijing is hoping for is to have Hong Kong continue to operate as a successful, vibrant financial center without democratic trappings, without a competitive political environment or a viable opposition. I think that they're taking a chance. They're taking a big risk that is completely unnecessary that they'll somehow be able to maintain confidence in the reputation of the city as these negative stories about governance start to emerge, because all of these pieces fit together. So I don't think it's the role of the international community to try and speed Hong Kong's demise, but this is certainly a negative trend.
Okay, Kurt, just very briefly, previously you've said that the practical implications of US sanctions on Hong Kong and China as a result of some of the actions in the national security law, for example, have been barely discernible. Do you think that changes now, either under the Trump administration or the incoming Biden administration?
Well, I think sanctions per se have very limited impact on decision making in Beijing, given the form of the government there, and their perception of the degree to which they are seeking approval from the United States, which is they're not. So a sanction from the U.S. can actually be a feather in the cap of the sanctioned official. So what does that leave the international community with? I think it's really important to emphasize the damage that China is doing to itself, its own reputation as a reliable partner that sticks to its agreements, and also and Hong Kong's reputation as a place to do business, which will be impacted over time by these changes in governance and perceived changes in the judiciary and rule of law. So I think that, but yes, sanctions, sometimes you got to do them just to send a symbolic message, but sanctions per se are not, I don't think, going to turn China around.